Welcome to Current Situation, your weekly political pulse. I'm your host, Joshua Gale, alongside South Carolina State House Representative Jordan Pace. Every week, our goal is to help you navigate the complex world of politics through biblically conservative perspectives. Before we jump into today's conversation, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsor.
Are you a veteran, medical professional, or first responder? Hi, I'm Travis Walthall, your trusted home loan chap, and at Premier Nationwide Lending, I specialize in serving heroes just like you. Whether you're protecting lives or healing patients, you deserve a home that reflects your dedication. As a VA loan expert and a specialist in medical professional financing, I'm here to provide your mortgage solutions. Contact me today to begin your journey. Premier Nationwide Lending. Visit us at loansbypremier.com/hello/Travis-Walthall. NMLS ID 1864838. Equal housing lender. Call for additional cost information. Other restrictions may apply.
Today, Jordan and I are discussing the South Carolina state budget and the processes and pitfalls around it. Jordan, I know you're exhausted. I know that you've been spending the last week studying the state budget. Before it went to the House this week for discussion. And I know there's been a lot going on at the State House, and we can't wait to learn about that process and what's going on currently at the State House from you. It's late at night as we record this, and I know that you've spent a lot of time in Columbia this week. And if anybody manages a budget for their household or their business, it is exhausting. And it takes a special person to do that. So we're thankful that we have you to cut through the spin on this budget and to really tell us what's inside of it. And yeah, so thank you. And I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you to tell us what's going on.
Yeah. So we started discussion on Monday, and just to give an idea what we're discussing, this is a paper copy of the state budget. This is what I got on my desk last week. And legally, we have to get this a week ahead of time on our desks, and it is thick. And this isn't big font. If you want to see what that looks like, so I have spent most of this year going to subcommittee meetings that I'm not on. I'm on the 3M committee. It's not the budget committee. So if I didn't have a committee meeting and I was in Columbia, I would go to these subcommittee meetings of Ways and Means where agencies would come and discuss how much more money they want and tell all the reasons why they want more money and that kind of thing. Just so I can learn, one, about what they're asking for, how much we've got, what's the process. And I learned a lot through the last few months. When we actually got the budget and were presented with everything in its totality, I learned even more. I learned that this budget did not cut a single dollar from any agency in the state. And in fact, it grew many of the agencies. I think there was well over 100. I think just Clemson had over 100 new full-time employees, but several hundred new full-time employees. And I mean, we're going to go through several instances of wasteful spending and just honestly crazy stuff. But it was big. It took several days, and there's a few of us that knew from the outset that, hey, this is going to be a problematic budget similar to last year, and prepared ahead of time to present amendments. I think altogether I prepared somewhere around 40 different amendments for various parts of the budget. And presented many of them, not all of them, but presented many of them from the well and tried to defend those. Unfortunately, none of them passed. We had a pretty good effort. Got more no votes against the budget. I had 15 no votes. It's more, I think 11 last year is what we had. Mm-hmm. And that was more than any in recent history, really, probably within our lifetimes. 15 is the most. So
that's a big deal.
Yeah. And a few years ago, the budget passed in one day, basically no discussion. So we are heading in a direction where this is at least discussed openly. Maybe one day we'll actually get to zero-based budgeting, which is something we're supposed to do, but we don't. It's actually
I do want to dive into that.
Yeah.
But before we dive into that, I want to throw up on the screen, if you are a listener, we do have a YouTube version of this podcast that has some visuals in it, things like that. Jordan and I are not great to look at, but we do sometimes throw some visuals on the screen. I have in my hands a mailer that was sent out I believe based on last year. Here is how Jordan Pace has voted so far this session.
Yeah.
Representative Jordan Pace was one of only 11 out of 124 who opposed a balanced budget that included investments and talks about, all these different things, roads and bridges and teacher pay raise and, all these different things. And of course there's spin around that.
Puppies, Jordan hates puppies and voted against dog shelters and, all
Right.
those kind of things.
And it's, to me, and I see text messages that went out against you, I think a little over a week ago, based on a bill that you voted against as well. Understanding marketing myself, mailers are extremely expensive.
Yes.
Number one, you have to purchase the information of the voter to actually have an address to send it to. Number one, there's the printing. Number two, there's a printing cost. Double-sided in color, all these different things. There's a graphic designer, all these different things. And then you've got postage, right? And then, so someone, and usually when we get a postcard like this, we don't realize it, but it's in very small print on the bottom. It prints on it who sent it out.
Yep.
And a lot of folks don't take the time to say, golly, like who would actually take the time to send this? And what is their benefit from sending this out? And so there's usually some dark money groups around it, and you have a hard time finding out who the funder is that's behind it, things like that. So I know that you're doing something pretty awesome when you have people that are spending a fortune trying to, with some defamation against you because you're doing something, you're doing your due diligence.
Well, the group that's been doing this, some group called the Palmetto Truth Project, they don't have a board. The only listed individual connected with them, like their listed agent on their tax filing, is a Democrat attorney who's on the Clarendon County School Board, which is currently being investigated for misappropriation of funds. Not exactly a strong character reference, but this group has spent probably close to $1 million over the last year against me and 14, 15 other members of the House that vote against special interest bills. And so the mail that you're talking about went out about a week after the budget vote last year, claiming that, I'm against law enforcement and teachers. I'm like, I was a teacher. My wife is a teacher.
Right.
Pretty sure I'm not against teachers because we voted against the budget in its totality, but we vote in the budget in sections. So if anybody ever wants to watch how this happens on the website or ETV, we go through each section of the budget and vote on that section individually. So like I voted in favor of the law enforcement section, SLED, giving them pay raises. I voted in favor of the education section. I didn't vote in favor of the wasteful spending parts of the budget last year, nor did it this year. So things like, for instance, this year we had $2.6 million increase for the Arts Commission. Now, the Arts Commission only gets about $5 million a year, and they wanted, and our budget that was passed, which I voted against, and I voted against this section, and I put an amendment up to try to eliminate this, was a $2.6 million increase. Now, what does the Art Commission do? Well, a lot of what they do is give awards and fund art and art projects. Most recently, according to the Post and Courier from a few days ago, their most recent winners was a sculptor who uses gummy bears as their mode of sculpting. So a gummy bear sculptor and homoerotic lewd art were their two big winners. So that's who received taxpayer funding. I did not think it was a good idea to give them more money.
And I couldn't agree more. I'm an artist myself. My wife and I are songwriters. We spend a lot of time doing that. We believe in the arts. We believe that live music makes money. We believe that it brings community together. We believe that we know the research behind live music and having that, access to it brings unity, and then it brings taxpayer, sales tax, all these different things. And it makes neighborhoods safer when you have access to live music.
Yeah.
But certain things which aren't sustainable, I'm sure that gummy bear sculpture, number one,
it's probably delicious.
It's probably delicious. Yeah. But really, honestly, what are we doing there? And it sounds extremely wasteful. Yeah.
And there's a conflict there of vision of like worldview where, and this was brought up in stark contrast when I was at the well presenting my amendment, both Democrats and Republicans jumped up and said, well, what about all this tax revenue that's produced by the arts? As if government is the only funder of art. I mean, even if they got and wound up getting this extra $2.6 million, how much money is spent to produce art in South Carolina? It's a whole lot more than $2.6 million.
Right.
The vast majority of artists are not government sponsored. And when the government injects itself into areas that it doesn't belong, into marketplaces like this, it distorts the market because it's subsidizing gummy bear statues.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what does that tell artists out there who are maybe not very good, their art isn't good enough to get public support, like from the populace, so they're going to go chase government money.
Right.
Well, they're going to make more gummy bear statues. It's going to make more of the other stuff that won awards. And that's what happens when government subsidizes things that it shouldn't subsidize. We get more of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you mentioned zero-based budgeting. Is that something that we do in South Carolina? I know it is practiced by our neighbors in Georgia.
Mm-hmm. So,
but is it
Georgia
something we
does
do
this.
here?
It's something we're supposed to do here, but we do not. So what zero-based budgeting is, basically the idea of taking a clean slate from last year's budget, rather than take last year's budget as a base and then add upon it. It's the idea is you come in at zero with every agency and have that agency come in and explain what they did with the money last year and why they need their whole budget again this year that they had last year.
Right.
That is not what happens in South Carolina. Like I said, I went to many of these committee meetings where the agencies came in, the universities came in, and rather than explain what they did with last year's money and why they should get that again and maybe more, the entirety of the meetings were the agency shows up, says, we would like more money for what these things we want to do, and then maybe ask a few questions about that new money that they're going to get. Now, they asked for a lot more money than they got.
Mm-hmm.
So that I don't want to pretend like they got everything they asked for.
Right.
But we do not do zero-based budgeting. And even today, when asked about that by a member of the press, the chairman of Ways and Means said as much. He said, yeah, we don't do zero-based budgeting. It's for whatever reason, it's just not something that we do, even though we're supposed to do it.
Right.
So
being someone in a former role, I was a senior director of technology for a company that worked with a lot of state agencies. So I was constantly looking at South Carolina bids, which they're all publicly listed. You can go and look through a procurement website for the state of South Carolina, and you can read through these bids, and you can look at these things. And so I would work with these government agencies, and one of my values is stewardship, and I would just see so much wasteful spending.
Yeah.
And I'd see bids chosen, whether it was mine or another, that was going to create more wasteful spending. These procurement officers, jump around different agencies, things like that. At the end of the day, their goal is to stay on track with the timing. It's not to consider cost. And
well, it's very easy to spend other people's money.
It's extremely and it would really extremely bother me. And I watched lots of organizations here in Charleston and throughout the state of South Carolina just spend so much money that they did not need to spend, because they knew that if they didn't spend it, they'd lose it. And they knew that they were going to need to spend it in order to get more.
Yeah.
And, a project that they would spend, several million on this year, that was completed, but it's going to ask for that same amount again, plus more. So anyways, I saw it firsthand. And if you want to dig into it yourself, you can look through the procurement website. You can look at these bids. You can look at what's being spent. And there's a lot of people that make an incredible living off of state government and being, and procurement from the state and the federal government.
The practice is called rent seeking. It's literally the economic term for that is rent seeking. And we have a really awful example of that in this year's budget.
Yeah. To tell us about that, Jordan.
Yeah. So literally, this is the definition of rent seeking, where several state agencies that a different bill that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, they're trying to like consolidate these health agencies under one new, larger bureaucracy, where physically they want to move these two. They hired this consulting group out of Boston, named the Boston Consulting Group, paid them a lot of taxpayer money to give these recommendations. I would not put a whole lot of faith in this group. Their beliefs on their website are totally antithetical to what I would consider South Carolina's conservative standards should be. Right. I mean, like we won't get into that, but people can look them up if they want to. Anyway, part of the recommendation was in consolidating this to put the buildings together, like move these agencies out of state-owned buildings that the state has owned for many, many decades, move them out of there where our only cost is maintain the buildings and into a privately held office building altogether that would cost over the course of a 20-year lease more than $352 million just in rent. Most people think, well, maybe they don't have to, if we're paying rent, you don't have to pay maintenance on the building. Well, that's in a gross lease, that might be true, but this is a triple net lease. And not to get too deep in the weeds on this, my commercial real estate background's coming out on display, but a triple net lease, the tenant is responsible for the maintenance, the taxes, and the insurance. So particularly the maintenance in the lease that was agreed to pending funding, the tenant, as in the taxpayers, would be responsible for all the maintenance under $100,000 per incident, is how these min-max clauses work.
Now, just for reference, $352 million. Do you know of a $352 million building?
I mean, there's a few around the state. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of acres, maybe one or two. I mean, like whole campuses. But that's a tremendous amount of money. Yes.
Yes. Not to house a few
Certainly
agencies.
Not an office building. No. Not an office space is, well, it is a lot easier to get office space than any other kind of commercial real estate right now in the whole country, but even particularly in South Carolina.
But we're not talking about Charleston. We're talking about Columbia.
Columbia, right, outside of Columbia. So $352 million would be the cost of the lease, plus basically all the maintenance other than maybe replacing the roof of the building would be on the taxpayers. And just so happens the guy or the entity that is purchasing the building that this agencies would go to, again, because the transaction isn't closed as of a few weeks ago, according to the state newspaper, is a huge mega donor, like to a lot of the leadership, to people in high places of power in South Carolina, as was reported by the Post-Courier and the state newspaper. So it is literally the definition of rent seeking. It's not a good financial decision for South Carolina. I mean, even on a policy level, like putting the Department of Mental Health with the Department of Disabilities and Special Needs and the Department of Alcohol, Drugs, and Other Addictions, like all next to each other, could have some possible problems of those groups interacting with one another. Now, sometimes they're the same people. So I could see maybe some reasoning why they would be near each other and bring that together. But moving them out of state-owned buildings is just not a fiscally prudent idea, especially
which state-owned buildings do not pay taxes.
They do not. In this case, the taxpayers will be paying the insurance and taxes on this building for this private individual.
This
private.
So
group.
just for reference, the Sean Jenkins Children's Hospital, which is one of the newest buildings here in Charleston, outside the Beach Company headquarters over there, the Jasper, $390 million was the total cost of construction, with $20 million donated by Sean Jenkins.
Right.
So that's just for reference. And that is a gigantic building.
It is enormous.
That overlooks the harbor here in Charleston.
Yep. In downtown Charleston, very expensive real estate.
In downtown Charleston, extremely expensive real estate. So thankful that we do have access to that hospital there, having 4 children of my own. But I just wanted to give that reference: $390 million for that building versus, we're saying over the course of several years, 300 and how many million?
$352 million is kind of is what we calculated.
rather than
That was
investing
in the budget.
right, and rather than investing and renovating what we do have
Mhm.
and coming up with a solid plan for that and being good stewards of what we do have,
Yeah.
wanting to do something and rent privately, it sounds like terrible stewardship to me.
Yes. I mean, it was fiscally imprudent is a bad stewardship, bad way to budget. I mean, you can name it all kinds of ways to say it. It's not a good idea.
And special
But
interests
that's
as well.
right. It is. And this was predetermined. And if you go look like at something called the RFP, like how did they get to this point? The request for proposals was limited to just leasing. They didn't even consider buying other properties or renovating. Like they didn't do a cost analysis of what would be cheaper and better for the taxpayers. They only went and looked for places to lease.
Mhm.
And I would be really surprised if they looked very hard past the place that they looked where they wound up at. So that's more that was in there. So a lot of wasteful spending, a lot of rent seeking there. I mean, there was a couple slush funds, something called a closing fund. There was $10 million in film incentives. So $10 million that would go to Hollywood film production companies rather than go to building more roads, fixing more bridges,
Mm-hmm.
or just going back in the taxpayers' pockets. I mean, keep in mind, we still have the highest income tax in the South. So that's kind of the overall picture of the budget. I wound up voting against it for many of those reasons and a few more.
Which $10 million is you have Atlanta next door, which is crushing it with music and movies and television. You got Wilmington, North Carolina. There's two major shows right there, Outer Banks and The Summer I Turned Pretty. $10 million is we're looking at some, yeah.
In reality is most of the big films that were filmed in South Carolina were filmed here before there were any film incentives. So think Forrest Gump, Radio,
Notebook,
Prince of Tides, The Notebook,
Patriot.
The Patriot. This was all before there were film incentives. But so that's just there. And then I'll leave you, maybe the last point on the budget itself. This budget still would use South Carolina taxpayer funds going to abortion and probably going directly to Planned Parenthood because of this federal, it's called family planning dollars.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 80-20 match. So in order to get this money, South Carolina has to put up 20% to the Fed's 80%. And by participating in this, historically, the state could not direct for or against any particular providers. But also coming with this is a mandate to go to Planned Parenthood because they do these family planning stuff. So my good friend Josiah Magnuson from the upstate in the Spartanburg area, he put up an amendment to fix this. The governor was in favor of this amendment. South Dakota, we modeled it on something South Dakota did several years ago where they stopped putting their tax money toward it and they did not lose any federal funding. Mm-hmm. It's a court tested. They won a court case in South Dakota about it. And he put it up. It got struck down. So because it was struck down, taxpayer money would still go to Planned Parenthood. So that was kind of like the nail in the coffin amongst all the other rent seeking and just
books,
wasteful spending.
Library.
And then there's that one last part. Yeah, $1.1 million would go down to county libraries, unrestricted money. And as we've all know, that actually broke on Twitter pretty broadly today that there was a FOIA done by my friend April Cromer in Anderson with their libraries up there as part of the Library Association from all over the state. But the public libraries and the libraries in the schools, librarians have been hiding books from hiding books from parents that these kids have access to
mm-hmm.
that have like transgender themes very explicitly in them in these children's books. We ran across one in a local library here in the Low Country. Thankfully, my county council was very reactive and they took action and got rid of that. But I mean, that's what these dollars would go to until that's rooted out of these county libraries all over the state. So for a myriad of reasons, I voted against it. I fully expect to have another mailer in my, go
Absolutely.
out.
That's how we know you're doing right.
Exactly. Right.
And you're not silent. This is a point I want to bring up. And
not been silent for 3 days, at least.
Well, no, but you're not silent on things that you know are wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why I love when you do get these text messages that go out, like the last one that went out about the bill that you voted against. Again, more money spent against you. But let's talk about silence for a moment here. Every week we talk about what folks can do. Jordan, finish this sentence. We won't see a difference in spending until, and then you say taxpayers would hold their representatives responsible for how they're voting. If there's 15 people voting against a budget out of, over 120 folks, there's a lot of silence happening. You're familiar with, you've been to a wedding ceremony, and most of us have. You hear this part of this spoken.
Was it yours?
Yeah, you were at mine. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, so we hear that, and that's asked, right? And normally that came out of Numbers 30:3-5, and that says here in the ESV, if a woman vows to the Lord and binds herself by a pledge while within her father's house in her youth, and her father hears her vow and pledge by which she has bound herself and says nothing, so he's silent to her, then all of her vows shall stand, and every pledge by which she has bound herself shall stand. But if her father opposes her on that day that he hears it, no vow of hers, no pledge shall she have bound herself to shall stand. And the Lord will forgive her because her father opposed her. Silence is compliance.
Yeah.
And being compliant to silence on what you know is wrong is the sin of omission.
Yeah.
If you know something's wrong, right? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, particularly in places where you have responsibility, right? Like that's a great example there of
a father.
The father is responsible for his daughter who's in his household. I mean, we still legally have that here. If your kid, breaks your neighbor's window, I mean, the kid's responsible, but you're fiscally responsible. Like you're financially responsible to replace that window. Yeah, that's the same idea.
Yeah. So Christians who remain silent on things that we know are wrong because we don't want to seem intolerant, or we don't want to seem, not loving, or, fill in the blank. That's silence.
Or just don't know.
Or just don't know because of ignorance.
Yeah. Right.
I say it every week. We don't get a pass. And our silence is consent to let others go and do as they please with our tax-paying dollars, and to let others go ahead and vote based on how special interests and a lot of other things that once we continue to pull on the strings, we realize there's special interest in all of this. But our silence and our ignorance to it all is sinful. And so that's, with this podcast, we're trying to expose a lot of these things to let people understand these are things you need to pay attention to. These are things that you are responsible for before God.
Yeah.
And so I want to end today with that. And I want to thank you for not being silent, Jordan. I want to thank you that you stand up for what's right.
It's one of the reasons I got into state government in general, is because I found out about all the bad stuff that was going on, and as a believer and just as an American citizen, I have a responsibility. We all have the responsibility to do something when we know something, and that's part of living in a republic. It's a lot of the blessings of being in a republic, in a representative democracy, but there's also a lot of responsibility that if we forego that responsibility, bad things happen, and they are happening.
Yep. And money's going to the wrong places.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of roads. We didn't get into it today, but we have a lot of roads and bridges that need to be fixed. And if we don't, we're going to be in a play. I mean, we all drive on these roads already.
Mm-hmm.
They're terrible. There is expected to become worse before it gets any better, and especially if we continue not to fund some of these projects.
Well, it's not just funding. Funding's part of it, but if we don't reform how they're funded, that'd be a great idea for maybe next week's podcast.
Let's not get into who owns the concrete company
Yeah.
for the highway. Anyways, well, thank you guys for tuning into Current Situation. Jordan, thank you for joining us. I know it's late on a Wednesday night. This podcast comes out tomorrow morning, but we really believe that this is stuff that folks need to know. We thank you for everybody who is subscribing and tuning in. We've got well over more than we expected of weekly listeners, and we're just grateful for that. And continue to tune in. Jordan and I are going to continue to expose things and educate and inform as much as we can and ask questions. And again, if you do have questions yourself, please submit those to us through social media, through our email, through our website, currentsituationpodcast.com. We love getting those messages from you, and we take this seriously. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.